Good afternoon. Welcome to the fifth lecture in a series of 6 for the Winter Lecture Series 2024. Stories from around Aiken County. Today's lecture is about Redcliffe Plantation in Beech Island. It has a very interesting history, but I'm not going to give you any previews because that is Marty Bailey's job when she gets up here. But first, my commercial. We want to thank Nelson Danish, who is our sponsor this year. Nelson, would you please stand up in the back? He made this possible. Nelson's family goes back in Aiken County to the 1780s. Wow. So I would say, if anybody can go back further than that, we need you on our lecture series next year. So, and the commercial that I'd like to give this week is a little different. There's always the main one. We need money, we need friends, we need members, we need volunteers, all of that. And I understand that 2 of you have volunteered since I've been giving these commercials. Thank you so much, it makes it all worth it. The next commercial is one for the future. Aiken County has given the museum 2 floors in the north wing of the public library over on Chesterfield Street. It has been abandoned. That's not quite right, because the library is there. You know what a beautiful job they've done redoing the library, and it has been fantastic. That was made possible because of a donation to the Friends of the Library by a woman who, donated well over $1 million. And that was a real surprise when the Friends of the Library got a check that big. So, and that was leveraged into the entire redoing of the library as you know it now. However, there is a wing that is not being used. If you come up the front steps where all the bricks are with people's names on them, to the left-hand side, there's a whole wing that is not in use. And the county is refurbishing that wing. And I'm not sure if that's the right word, but let's put it this way. They're going to make it habitable. And then after it's habitable, the Aiken County Historical Museum will have the 2nd floor for archival purposes. This means that we can have, or we hope to have, cold storage for film so it doesn't go away and we don't have it anymore. We're going to have Recollections, our oral history program, headquartered there, so we have a dedicated interview room. We will have space for people to do research on Aiken County history. And the floor below, the 1st floor, will be the Aiken Barnwell Genealogical Society, and there's a massive amount of information of that too, because Aiken goes way back, and not just to 1835, when the town was actually made official by the state legislature. People lived here. We don't know much about them, but we usually use the start of the railroad as the time when Aiken started. Well, then it had a name. Before, it was probably just a crossroads. But there are people who go back so far, just like Nelson's family, and others who want to fill out their family trees, so they'll be doing that on the 1st floor. People who want to write books or take things back to write books, etc., will be up on the museum level. And the reason I'm telling you all this is how we envision it. What we need is money to do it, because the county has described what it's going to do this way. If you take that wing, particularly the 2nd floor, and you turn it upside down, anything that falls out is what we have to pay for. Tables, chairs, desks, shelving, the things that make it usable. So we'll have the space but we need to put the things in it where we can actually operate the North Wing archival program that we're going to have there. So we are not ready to kick it off officially, but you know ahead of time now what we're hoping to grow into. And we'll be having a fundraising, a capital campaign for that. I just want you to think every time you come to the museum, every time you attend a lecture, that all of the materials that we have here that can be stored better, all of the research materials that we have here will be more accessible. Our oral history programs will be available on tape for you to watch, listen to. It'll be a fantastic addition to what we offer here. Don't go thinking that we're not having these winter lecture series, because we will. The popular things that draw people to the museum will be here. We will just have the research and educational parts, the serious parts over there. So that's my commercial. If you would like to be involved with that, please let me know. We need a lot of help. We need, well, I don't have the details yet, but we will have them. I just wanted you to know that aside from those 4 things that I listed earlier, money, volunteers, time, whatever the other one was. Okay, members, we need members. We need help doing other big projects too. So, okay, end of commercial and on to your program. Redcliffe Plantation will be a story told today by a transplant from Texas who fell in love with the city's people, spirit, and history when she began learning about Aiken through her volunteering at the city's visitor center and the historic museum. Wanting to share her love of Aiken and its fascinating history, she created tailored tours of Aiken. You've probably seen that car driving around with people who want to learn more about history on the road. What began with just one tour and a few locals as guests quickly grew to several different tours and guests from all over the nation and the world. So, Marty Bailey, please enlighten us about Redcliffe Plantation.
Good afternoon. I'm glad y'all could come. Redcliffe is someplace that's really dear to me. It's got so much involved in it that I couldn't possibly cover the entire history of Redcliffe. So we're going to do just a quick run through and a virtual tour of the facility. How many of you have actually been to Redcliffe? A good portion of y'all. All right. There's a few of you who haven't. If you have not been, and even if you have, you still want to keep going back, because a lot of times the furniture will be moved around. They'll bring out pieces that have been in storage and store other pieces that have been out. You'll have a different tour guide, and they add extra little pieces that the other tour guide might not have thought to put or had time to put. Go on your own or call me and I'll take you out there for a tour. Whichever way gets you there, you want to keep going back time after time. And of course, walking the property as well, which is just as gorgeous as the home itself. Now we start off with Redcliffe Plantation. It was a plantation long before what's standing there is there. Okay, if that makes any sense, there was something already there first. But before we talk about Redcliffe, we need to talk about the Carolinas. How do we get plantations here? How did South Carolina come to be? Well, real quick and real easy, the King of England thought he owned a good portion of this country. Sorry about that, Don. So the King of England thought he owned like everything from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. All of this he thought was his. And he thought he was going to give it out in land grants to his buddies. But then he realized this is like way too much land to handle. So he started selling off pieces He started trading off with other countries because Spain was already here in the States, so were the French, and he knew he couldn't handle this, so he went ahead and he started cutting it back little by little, and it was still too much to handle even by the 1700s. And then finally we get North and South Carolina. Now North and South Carolina were combined to become one state, one colony, but the politicians in the northern part didn't handle what was going on in the South. You had too much land here. So the politicians here didn't want to be messed with those up here. These up here didn't want to mess with here. So they ended up separating the two. South Carolina stood on its own. It had a big agricultural base. And more of these men are getting land grants by the king, who still thinks he owns this place. And so he's given his friends the land. When they come here, they start building their plantations, which don't look anything like our plantations today that we envision, right? When we think of plantation, what do we think of? Gone with the Wind. Yes, these big, beautiful homes. We think of Boone Hall and Mount Pleasant, and we think of Crossways here in Aiken. But that was not what the average plantation home looked like at the very beginning. In fact, Boone Hall, that one right there were 4 other homes there on the property for the family before they got to this. So they started off as just small farmhouses. This was actually a plantation home here in Aiken. It was it's on the east side of the county, privately owned, so you can't go visit it. But it still stands today from the 1700s. But it was a typical plantation home. They would grow to 2 stories if at all possible. Sometimes they were log cabins, but those were plantations as far as they knew. And then as the money came in through the different crops that they grew, then we started getting what we know as a plantation home. Now before there was Redcliffe, the property was already owned by somebody else. And then we had the life of this gentleman here, James Henry Hammond. Now, James Hammond was of parents from Massachusetts. His father, Elisha, was an educator. He was a teacher. The mother, of course, was a homemaker. They moved down to South Carolina to what we now know as Newberry County. And then James was born in 1807. Father had all these ideas of being wealthy. He had planned on becoming rich, but no matter what he did, he never obtained his goal. And those of y'all who are educators, at least it used to be, you know, you're not going to get rich teaching, right? So he also ran a store, but that didn't really prop him up like he had hoped. So his hopes lay in his son, James. Now, he would kind of schmooze James into becoming a lawyer. He kept prompting him to get an education because he figured being a lawyer, he was going to get rich. And so James did go to school. Eventually, he ended up at South Carolina College, passed the bar, and was practicing law in Columbia. But that still didn't really get him the wealth he had been seeking, nor his father. Now, the father was so desperate to become rich, y'all, that he was kind of like schmoozing his uncle, because uncle was rich, and so he was hoping that if he was real good to the uncle would leave him a big portion of the estate. But he didn't. They had a falling out, so all the money that the father, Elisha, thought he was going to get went to another family member. So that was that, right? So now James has to create his own fortune. But try as he might, he can't. He starts off as a teacher, he turns into a journalist, he starts a newspaper that doesn't quite run a whole year, but it's enough to get his name out there in the public. He goes and he joins the Nullification Party, which eventually turned into Democrats of that particular period. And he was sitting and pushing up having slaves, no taxation by the federal government. So that's where he's charging his horse up the hill, so to speak, but he's still not rich. Nothing he does is making him rich like he wants. So now his only option is to get married. Now, because he's an attorney, he is making contacts everywhere he goes, and he learns about the Fitzsimmons family in Charleston, who They've got trades, they've got stores, they've got land, even owning land here in what is now Aiken County, having slaves. I mean, these are rich folks. And we have a picture here of this little girl. This ended up being his wife, Catherine, and she's sitting with her mom. Now, I put this picture because I can only find 2 photos of this woman. Neither one of them are very flattering to her, but it's all I can find. And if anybody knows any better ones, please let me know after the program because I'm dying to see what she looked like. I'm assuming she looked like her mother. So he hears about the Fitzsimmons family. Catherine is now grown up. She's 15 whole years old, and she has no suitors to speak of. She's a little bit homely looking. She's very quiet. She's not the social light out there, and she doesn't have prospects to get married. So when this gentleman comes around and he starts sweet talking her, well, she starts perking up, and then he proposes marriage, and she's like, oh yes, somebody wants to marry me. But the family doesn't want him. You see, they know that he is a gold digger. He only wants poor Catherine for her money. They know what she is. They love her, but they know what she is and what her prospects are. But they don't want her to get hurt, so they keep telling her, no, 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 you cannot marry this man. James is this type of person who is very charming when he wants to be. He's very driven. He can pretty much talk somebody like, where's an old saying, you sell ice to an Eskimo? He could have that power over somebody if he wanted to. And so he kept on working on Catherine. Catherine now is 16, almost 17, and he's really pushing her to get married. And finally she tells her parents, well, her mom and her brothers, I am going to marry this man, and you can't stop me. And if I have to marry him without my dowry, I'll do that. Now, in those days, a woman did not marry without a dowry. If she had any type of prominence in that town, she had to have a dowry. Money, furniture, whatever it was, she better come with something, or the marriage didn't have to go through. And so she tells James pretty much, yes, I want to marry you, but they won't let me. And so that's when the family tells her, well, how about if you marry him, all he gets is you. Catherine's fine with that idea. He loves me. He wants me for me, not my money. And when they proposed the idea to James, he was like, oh, that's an affront to me. How dare you even propose that idea? Perhaps we don't need to get married if that's what you think about me. Catherine now is at the point where she's like, you know what? We'll just elope. I don't care. She's almost 17, y'all. She's feeling her oats. James is fueling that fire underneath her, and the family finally realizes either allow the marriage or she will run off and marry him. So they say yes, and the two get married. She's just turning 17. James is about 8 years older than she, which today doesn't make a whole lot of difference, thank goodness, because my husband's 8 years older than me. But in those days, it did make a whole lot of, never mind. So they went ahead, got married, and then they moved here to Aiken County because with her comes about 150 slaves and 7,500 acres of property.
Good Lord.
Y'all, we're talking lots of dowry here. And in those days, the slaves were almost as money, monetarily wise, almost equal with what the land would have been worth, okay? So they get married. They immediately start having children. They're married in 31, and in 32, here comes the first baby. And then as you see by the section, they just keep on going down. Each year they've got a baby, it seems like. Now, poor Charles Hammond, this is Charles Julius Hammond, born in 1837, died the same year. He wasn't even quite a year old. And this is because I believe Catherine is not in a good place to have her son. Hammond, if you read anything about him, you know that he is a self-serving man. He is a narcissist. He's got mental health issues, as we would say today. He has migraines. He's got stomach ulcers because everything he does is right, and everybody in the world who condemns him for doing what he does is wrong, and they just don't understand him. And so as a result, he gets upset stomachs, ulcers, migraines, and according to one of his companions, he can faint as good as any woman. You know, those days, if women got upset, oh my goodness, well, he can do it too. All right, so he is now at a place where he's sickly. The doctor says, go to Europe, you'll heal in Europe. And he takes Catherine with her while she's with child. She gives birth in Germany, and within a few months, the baby is dead. But they do come back to the States, and they continue to have more children. So the ones in white are the ones who lived full lives. The one in blue was the poor baby that passed away. For Hammond's accomplishments, and this is what good I can say about him, because I preface this with what you're going to hear in just a moment. He was a governor of South Carolina. He was so full of himself, y'all, that when he ran the first time for governor, he actually moved to Columbia, built a big old home in hopes of becoming governor, but he didn't win that election, so he had to come back to Aiken. He's kind of going back and forth to Columbia, but he's got the house he's got to pay for, right? But he's got Catherine's money, so that's no big deal. Eventually, he does become governor, and they live in that home, and Catherine is okay with that because that's where her brother-in-law and 4 nieces live. So it gives her family to be around. He does get voted in as a U.S. congressman and a U.S. senator. The thing that I would have to say, probably the best of everything that he's ever done, was that he documented all the details of his life. Good, bad, indifferent. He wrote down in his journal, he wrote down in diaries, he kept lists. He even wrote a book about what you should do with your particular life. And then he said his highest accomplishment was that he married Catherine. Now, judging by the way he behaved around her and toward her, I would say he only said that because he married her and got rich. Okay, so that was where he had made the accomplishment, is that he married money. While he's a senator, there is the nullification party. They don't want to have taxation by the federal government. They don't want anybody telling them not to have slaves, because in his mind, if it wasn't for the slaves, everybody else would have to go to work. And while he was in Europe, he saw that there was no slavery system, and there was the rich, the middle class, and the very poor who were begging on the streets. And he comes back saying, you see, we have slaves here, and they're fed, they're housed. You don't have nobody begging in the streets. I don't know what street he visited, y'all, but if you read history, you'll know that there was a very poor class during that time as well. But while in the Senate in 1858, he stands up because now they're talking about maybe secession. It's not time to secede, but they're talking about it. And they're talking about the North raging war on the South, and that's when he stands up and yells out, no, you dare not make war on cotton. No power on earth dares to make war upon it. Cotton is king. Now, he says this because he's a cotton planter, right? And he's hoping that he's going to keep making money with the cotton. Eventually, he doesn't, because we do go to war. This is another picture I found of Catherine. Bless her heart, you see that she is a little bit homely looking and definitely not happy, but married to a man like this, you can understand why. And this is he in his older years. Now, by 1855, he's got money, he's got prestige, he's got almost 300 slaves. So that's a lot of property that he considered that was worth money too. And he starts buying up more land all around what we call Silver Bluff, and then eventually he buys Redcliffe. Now, Redcliffe already had this property here, this house. It was owned by a Dr. Millage Dolphin, and he sold the property to Hammond. But this house isn't good enough for Hammond. He wants to build a larger home. Now, in this whole time, while he's learning to be a planter, while he's learning to maintain his slaves, y'all, he loses 87 slaves within a 10-year period. Not to them running away, but to them dying because he's overworking them. He's not feeding them properly. He knows nothing about the farm life other than he likes the idea, but he doesn't know what he's doing. So because of that, he loses 87 people that were employed by him, or as he would have said, owned by him. He does eventually learn from some of his friends to feed them properly, to work them properly. He writes a manual, not just for himself, but also for any of his overseers and for anybody else who wants to read it. And he talks about how much to feed each slave each year or each month. He tells about how much clothing each one should get. Men get 2 pairs of pants, 2 shirts. Women, they get the fabric to sew their own dresses, which is done by hand and in between time that they're having to work the fields or the big house and then do whatever it is that they're doing. So these women are really pushing every button trying to make a living and stay out of trouble. He talks about how to punish his slaves. You know, don't hit them while you're in anger. Only X amount of lashings can they get. And you're thinking, well, that's nice. He doesn't want to overbeat them like we've seen in other plantations. But no, his idea to not beat them into senselessness is not because he's being kind, but because he wants to keep his slaves able to continue working. If he beats them too much, they either die or they're so hurt that they can't go out. So what good are they? Right? So he's not being nice. He's just simply saying, let's not beat them too much so we can still put them to work. In the food, across the food serving to the slaves as well, he learns that women who are with child need extra nutrients, and he makes sure to write that down in his book. And then the children that they bear, they're able to nurse their children for a year. And then after that, they have to go back to work, and there's a wet nurse that can continue to take care of the children. And then even the children get extra portions of food. And you might think, oh, that's so sweet. He knows these children need their nutrition. Well, he knows that, but he also knows that if the children don't eat well, they're not going to grow up to be strong, strapping slaves, and then they're useless to him. The mothers who are pregnant, they need to have extra nutrition so they can give a full, healthy baby, which gives him extra property. So again, he's writing all of this down. And because of his writings, we also know the names of his slaves. If you go through history, so many slave owners did not notice the names of their people. They simply had slave 1, they talked about it being a male, maybe weighed a certain amount of weight. But this man wrote down the names of his slaves, how much he paid for them, what jobs they held there at the plantation. So now these people are still alive for us. They're not just gone and forgotten, but they're people who were living, breathing on that land. And we can now appreciate what they've done. And their families, because many of them have trouble finding the family lineage because, well, as slaves, the families were separated and sold out. But today there's more people coming back and saying, I want to know who my great-great-grandmother was. I heard she was at Redcliffe. Let me see if I can find it. And because of his notes, these people are able to find some of their family members. So that's where he's really good about that, but it wasn't because he was so generous at heart, it's just because that's the way he was. He wanted to make sure everybody knew what he had. So he buys this home called Redcliffe from Mr. Gaff or Dr. Gaffin, but the home again, it's not really what he wants, so he decides to build not too very far from where this is. And the family lives here while Redcliffe that we know is being built. And then in 1917, it catches fire. By that time, it's called the Old Yard, and it catches fire and it's gone to history. But it wasn't too much further away from the Redcliffe that we know. Now, this is an aerial view I got off the internet. It shows some of the buildings that are still standing today and some that are not anymore. You've got slave quarters. There were 4 of them, here, 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 and then there used to be one over here, but then that was converted into a carriage house and then a garage, and that's what it is today. There used to be a pigeon coop here in the yard. It's no longer there. There was a kitchen, and there was another bin for possibly fertilizer, wood to cook on. The stable that we see here had another branch sticking out like a big L shape, and then behind it was a huge cistern where the rainwater would collect off of the roof of the stable and then into the cistern, and then they could use that later. And at some point, he had a wine cellar, which, too bad it's not there anymore, right? Because I think I'd help with the archaeology on that one. And then we have the home itself, which doesn't look like it looked at the beginning of its existence. Redcliffe, when it was first built, was built as a two-story home up on brick pillars, which is what they did here in South Carolina. And especially in this area, there's a lot of brick. We had like 5 brick companies between here and Augusta. All the red clay, how can you not have brick, right? And so they had brick pillars. It was built up, you got a main hallway, and then each floor has 2 rooms on either side of the hall, downstairs and upstairs. What we don't have anymore is the balcony up on the top that actually was a balcony upstairs on all 4 sides of the home and the bottom. You see that the stairway was centered into the home, and up at the top was a cupola, or an observatory, if you will, made of windows, and that's where they would go up. There is an attic here, and you see little windows that go along to the attic. The attic was never completed as rooms to be used. It was more of a storage facility that you would have to go up the stairs to, and then through the stairs, through the attic, you would go to the observatory. They do that occasionally at Redcliffe. They offer tours. You get to go up to what is now a widow's walk. They used to hold them in the summer until a couple of people used to kind of monkey over, going over the steps or up the steps. It's really hot up in the attic during the summer. And so now they hold it when it's much cooler. Today, this is where Redcliffe as we know it. We don't have the balconies anymore. In the 1880s, they started realizing that there was drainage problems from the rain, and it was eating the wood away on those, the porch, the top porches. So they eliminated that. The family took them away, and then they moved the stairway from the center to the side and created one L-shaped big porch for this home. The pillars are still made of brick, but it doesn't look like brick here. But if you start to peel away some of the plaster that's covering the bricks, you'll see that, and you'll see it in just a minute. This is the back of the cottage of the plantation home, and you see that there is now a widow's walk up here at the top. Again, they had drainage issues, and so they took down all the windows and the observatory and turned it into a widow's walk in the early 1900s. And this is the family doing all of this. They had 3 generations living here. There was Hammond, it was his son, and then later on it would have been his great-grandson or grandson, John Shaw Billings, who had bought the home actually because he was the only one who could afford it. And so he would come here and he would also do some changes. There's one of those brick pillars I told you all about. And you see that it's got that like a stucco on it to make it look almost like maybe it's granite or something really impressive. But it's just the localized red brick, but still holding up since it was built. Built between 1857 and 1859, it's still there, y'all. I don't know if any of our modern homes are going to last that long. When you go up the stairs, you're going to go up onto the large L-shaped porch, and believe it or not, even in the heat of summer, it's cooler on the porch than it is down on the ground. And that's because you're up in the air and you're catching the breezes that don't make it quite down to the ground. But while on your porch, I want you to start looking, if you go back again, I want you to look at the little details, like the hinges on the shutters. Y'all, these are hand-forged hinges that were created for this home. They're a little bit rusty, yes, but they still do work. But again, hand-forged. Who does that today, right? Even if we could, we still don't. When you walk in the front door, you're entering the main hall, which is 20 feet wide, 53 feet long, and this is where you would have entertained the guests back in the day. Yes, there were rooms off of the hallway, but the hallway was where you had your chairs. You open up both doors on either side of the hallway, so you've got a nice cool draft. You've got wonderful crown molding here at the top that you will not see on the second floor because why? There's no point. Your guests are coming onto the first floor. They're not going to the second story, so they don't have to be impressed upstairs. It's downstairs where you're impressing your people, showing them what you can afford, and you keep it all there. Looking from the other side of the hallway, you see there's the furniture, there's a door on either side, and there's this one particular couch right here that I've highlighted here. According to family lore, this was created, it was designed by James Henry Hammond. That was his personal chaise lounge, and the same one that he supposedly died on as well, died of mercury poisoning. I told y'all he was real sick all the time, he said. Now, his friends said he wasn't as sick as he pretended to be, but that was his claim that, oh, I've got migraines, I can't do, got ulcers, I can't eat. But eventually he died from mercury poisoning, probably a medicinal mercury, but nevertheless, it still took him out. When you walk through the home, look at the hinges on the doors. I don't know if any of y'all have been there, have noticed. These are sterling silver hinges. Who puts that on a house, right? But he's got them throughout all the doors. They're sterling silver. This shows the wealth that this man possessed. Yes, he got it from Catherine, but eventually getting his act together, he was able to make a good deal of money growing cotton and corn. As you go into the first room, it is a parlor. The furniture here you'll see moved around, switched out for other pieces of furniture. So when you go in, you may not see this exact chairs or table, but it's okay because all the furniture belonged to some of the family at some point in time. What you will always see is the fireplace, the piano, and this portrait here. And then a portrait that you don't see here, but you will see when you turn around from the door. And this is the Ascension of Christ. Now this is a replica. It's only half the size of the original painting done by an Italian painter. But when Hammond went to Europe, he had to show that he was all worldly and he knew about artistic touches. So he had one commissioned and he had it brought to the States so he could keep in his home. When you look at the fireplace, you're going to look at these wonderful tiles that surround the hearth. These are not just hand painted. The clay is colored and then set into the tile and then fired up. So even though you walk on it back and forth, the color doesn't fade like you would a hand painted tile. Odd thing is though, is that tile is some of the same tile, the same pattern that you're going to find at the U.S. Capitol. Now, true or not, I don't know, but I have heard different stories, and there were some stories that say it just so happened that while Hammond was at the Capitol, a box of those tiles went missing. Others have said, no, that's not true. It was just a rumor. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I do know that he has some of the tiles that today still stand in the Capitol. There's also this portrait of young Annie. Now, Annie, this portrait is really something special. This is a post-mortem painting. Back in the 1800s and even earlier than that, but most of the 1800s, there was so many deaths, children, women, young people dying so quickly, it was unbelievable. They didn't really have cameras. You know, everybody didn't have cell phones. Not everybody had cameras. So photographers were learning a different business, and that was to take pictures of the dead. They would dress them up, and they would either prop them up, and they would stand with family members, and they would take pictures with the family, because that was the only memory they would have of their deceased loved one. And that went from infants, mothers cradling the infant, to siblings sitting all with each other on the couch. And if they didn't have a photograph, then they would have a painting made. Now this is made of Annie, and she had passed away, and so they made this painting for her mom. Now we know that she's passed away because of the very white complexion. She's super pale, and she's wearing a black dress with a red shawl. Black and red in those days were indicative of death. They're symbolic of death. But there's also something hidden in that photo or in that painting that you may not see unless you know just where to stand when looking at this. If you look here to her right, or her left actually, our right, there's something here that also symbolizes death. Can't see it here, but you see it when you pull it up. It's a lily, another symbol of death. But it's hidden so that when you're just looking at the painting, you're, oh, how pretty. And then you see that. And once you see the lily, you can't hardly unsee it when you look at the painting. And it was given to Mom to remember her daughter by.
Who was she in the lineage of the family?
She was in the lineage of the family, yes. You'll also see this piano given to a 9-year-old for her birthday, made out of cherry wood. I mean, doesn't all 9-year-olds, don't they all get pianos like this? You will then go into the library. The library has all of these magnificent bookshelves made out of cypress harvested from the property. Or sycamore, I'm sorry. And it was harvested from the property and built here by the enslaved men and women, possibly men though, who were very skilled at what they did. And within the shelves are all kinds of books. You've got history, you've got comedy, almost every type of a book you're gonna find it in here, not just from James, but from the other family members who lived here.
What year was this built?
The home was completed in 1859. Took them about 2 years to complete. Now, one of the things you'll notice, if you notice the little things, which I love little things, that's what pops up history for me. When you go to the back side of these bookshelves, you're going to see where the craftsman carved the bookshelf to fit the floor molding. He didn't just cut the molding and say, let's shove the bookshelf in. They didn't just cut the bookshelf and say, well, we just won't put that part in, or we'll just let it hang an inch or two away from the wall. No, they actually trimmed that out so that it would fit against the molding perfectly. Y'all, I don't even know who does that today. And I know a lot of craftsmen who do jobs like this, but they don't do this. And they had it in the 1850s. That shows that these enslaved people were not just your average Joe Schmo working the cotton field. They had skill, mad, crazy skills. Within the library, you're going to see this portrait here. This was John's only daughter, John Shaw Billings' only daughter, only child, actually. She passed away at 3. Her nickname was Skeeter. They never did have another child, and they kept some of her toys there at the home and one of her little rocking chairs, which you'll see on that tour. Cross the hallway into another room. What used to be a dining room is now a bedroom. I love this bed, y'all, because it's so high up off the ground. And we look at it and we think, well, that's awfully pretty, but gosh, you got to step up on those steps to get up there. Well, it was built up high up for a purpose. You've got your windows wide open in the summertime. It's hot in the house. Your bed is almost equal with the window, so when the breezes flow through, it's cooling you off. Now, you will have mosquito netting coming off of that bed because you don't want to get malaria, right? And which was prevalent in a lot of times. But you would have your mosquito netting, but the breeze is still flowing over your body. Now, this was, when Hammond lived here, a dining room. And here in the back, you see a door that used to be a door that led to the dining room from the kitchen downstairs. Now, the kitchen was outside of the home at first. You can't let nothing catch fire, and then you lose a big home like that, right? And eventually, through the years, it was moved into the home, but down in what we would call the basement. And there was a set of stairs that went from the kitchen up to the dining room, but eventually this was made into a bedroom, and that was turned into a small closet. The dining room, however, is even bigger than the original, and they've got a fabulous table in here. And of course, there's a picture of James Henry Hammond. The table is not always set with the same china. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less, and then there's different china patterns according to whatever the family had left behind. This one in particular belonged to John Shaw Billings. I fell in love with it. I love the Tiffany blue, but even more so, I love this. Does anybody know what this is?
Salt cellar.
Very good, a salt cellar, yes. To show that you were wealthy, because salt was a very expensive spice in those days, they would have little bowls of salt. And there was either a little spoon that would go with it, sterling silver or glass, and you would then have your own salt cellar, and you could then spoon up the salt and put it onto your food. So this was something that was expensive in those days and something really neat to have. And this one was cobalt blue glass with sterling silver surround. Those are real hard to find, y'all. They've got a sterling silver pitcher with glasses, because you've got to have water while you're eating, of course. And then they've got this thing here. Anybody know what this is? A what? Not a pie server. Food warmer. Yeah, this is an early form of a microwave, y'all. The food had to come into the dining room, and not all the time was the family ready to eat. So they would have this structure right here made out of tin with no back door. And it would be set up against the fireplace, the food placed inside the shelves, the door closed, and the food would stay warm until the family was ready to eat. Pretty nifty, huh? If you go upstairs, you're gonna have to walk. So make sure you got your walking shoes with you, or you've taken your Bengay or whatever else that you need. For me, I have to go a little bit slower each year, it seems, but that's all right. At least I can walk, right? When you're going up the stairs, you're gonna see this metal plate going up, almost like a rod. And that was for a chairlift that John Shaw built for his wife. She had some health issues. She had trouble going upstairs. So it's got this huge wooden board at the very tip top. You can just see the corner of it. And it's electric, and so they would put the board down, she could sit on it, and they would raise her up or down the stairway. But you will have to walk. When you go upstairs, you're gonna see all sorts of beds. All the rooms upstairs are bedrooms. And so we've got this one here with the oak bed, got little fleur-de-lis at the top, which is a little bit difficult to see in the photo. When you go there in person, you'll get to see it. Here in this photo, we have what I love to see, and I would love to try it maybe one day, and that's a tin hat bathtub. Y'all, this is a big round thing. It looks about 5 feet in circumference, maybe bigger. It's got a little well at the bottom, and it's a flat piece of metal right here where you sit your bum on, and your servants pour the water over your body. You take you a quick bath, they rinse you off, and then they would have to empty the water from the tub. This is one of the tubs that they use. Now, bear in mind, bathing was not a daily ritual like we do today. It still would have been difficult for the servants to have to empty the tub, but you have to stay clean. If you didn't take a bath, well, that's when women started using nosegays. Nosegays were those little bouquets of flowers that women would carry, trying to look all prissy and pretty, but really it was so that if somebody walked by with offensive body odor, they could sniff the flowers. They'd still look cute, but they weren't smelling the thing that was walking next to them. But in the meantime, hopefully you could take you a bath and stay clean. This, for ladies, anybody guess?
Bathroom?
A bidet. Because you got to stay clean in between baths, right? You would lift the lid, and then there's an enamel pot inside so you can freshen up. This is something that isn't always on display, and when it is, I'm like, oh, yes, I love to see it. This is Catherine's apothecary box. In those days, you didn't always have doctors. You had them, but they weren't right next door to you or 5 minutes away. You had those country doctors that would have to make house calls, and heaven knows when they could come to your house. So it was usually the woman of the home that had to tend to the family, and she would use herbs and all these different little natural pieces to make ointments and elixirs, and treat the person who was sick. And this was hers with some of the original bottles. A few years ago, they still had the liquid inside them. A couple of bottles still had the original liquid, but nobody that I knew was brave enough to open it and try it. So we don't know what's in it. Because I know how Mr. Hammond was, I kind of think maybe there was some mercury in there, and maybe she kind of helped him to slip away into the next party. Don't know for a fact, that's just my idea. Another thing you'll see in the bedroom is this. We have one here in the museum. It looks a little bit nicer. I think it's not as old as this one, but it's here in the museum, and it's in Redcliffe. Anybody know this?
Potty.
It is a potty, yes. It's an earthen closet, an earthen toilet. Right here through the top is where you're going to put sand, dirt, maybe wood shavings, and then underneath here, you're going to put your chamber pot. When you're ready to go, let's say middle of the night, the average person has to go out of the house, across the yard, to the outhouse. Who wants to do that at midnight or later, right? Especially when the weather's foul. But these folks didn't have to worry about that. They could go in the comfort of their own home. So they would lift this lid here. Underneath it is the toilet seat. They would sit there, do their business. When you lift the lid here, there is a small handle underneath that you would kind of twist. And in twisting the handle, you're then moving a mechanism inside that box that drops the dirt or the sand onto the chamber pot. So hopefully it will take care of the smell during the night. So in the morning, you have your servants go and clean out the chamber pots.
It's like a litter box.
And human litter box. Very good.
Litter box.
Human litter box.
That's great.
And when these were sold brand new, they were advertised as being like the most hygienic thing you could ever have in your home. Going into the hallway of the upstairs, you go to some of your park rangers will open the door, let you look out to what would have been that beautiful big old porch you could walk out on. Again, we don't have that ever since the 1880s, but they do have sorry about that. They do have the railing here, so when you look out the door, you can't fall over. Okay, you're not supposed to, right? And so they have that there. You look out, you're looking out onto what would have been the front yard of Redcliffe. But today, all you see are trees. Now, imagine this. No trees, because they've all been harvested for the home and furniture. It's clear cut pretty much all the way to the Savannah River. And what you're looking out in the background is the state of Georgia. Now, I've enlarged the photo so you can see Georgia there in the background. But imagine just standing there and looking out and seeing it all. You almost feel like you're God looking over your property, right? And I imagine that's how Hammond felt. Another bedroom will have more furniture in it. This particular room has 2 different beds. If you had company, or as in family company coming over, then you would be able to put the whole family in one room. Or if somebody was sick, let's say a child is sick, the mother or whoever's taking care of the child could then sleep in one bed, the child in another. But these rooms are truly big enough where you could probably put 4 beds and still have room for other furniture. We've got one bedroom that has Skeeter's little rocking chair. Remember that little child that died at 3 years of age? That's her rocking chair right here. Now, you've gone through the home, but you want to walk the property. Remember, this gentleman is a cotton grower. He also experiments with other fruits and vegetables. Doesn't do so well with grapes, but then nobody does well with grapes around here. In fact, over where we now have Montmorency, the Vale, well, they tried to grow grapes there too, and that didn't work. We have scuppernongs, but that's not the same as grapes. If some of y'all ate scuppernongs, y'all know it's like you chew and you never get finished chewing. So grapes don't do so well here, and Hammond found that out too, but he still attempted to have that, and today there is a small little vineyard where they show where he used to be. When you're looking out in the back, you're walking around the property, you're going to come across one slave quarter. There were 4, remember, but we only have 1 today, and it was built as a duplex. One family on one side, the other family on the other, sometimes 2 families on one side and 2 on the other. They didn't really care if you were related or not, you just needed to stay put inside the home. Now you'll notice it's also built up on the clay pillars, clay brick pillars, and it's about 2 feet off the ground, maybe just a little bit higher. That was for the purpose not to give ventilation to the home as others would have done, but to make sure that the slaves wouldn't escape. I mean, you know, they can cut a hole in the floor if they want and try to go out that way, but if it's up on the top like that, if it's up high, they're not going to sneak out as easily. There also were no windows built in the building for that same purpose. Would it have been hot in the summer? You betcha. But it's not like Hammond cared. He just wanted to make sure his property was secure. This is the interior of that slave quarter. They did have a fireplace at the time. There's a double-faced fireplace, so one on one side, one on the other. Chances are the closet did not exist. That would have been put in later, because after emancipation, some of the formerly enslaved families stayed on the property, like the Henleys. They've been there before the Hammonds ever had the property, ever lived there. So after emancipation, having really nowhere else to go, they chose to stay there, and then they could sharecrop on the farm. Sharecropping wasn't easy for them either, though, because we had the Jim Crow laws, which forced them to have a job, be indoors by dark. They couldn't really own a business, and when they did go to work for the white man, they were paid maybe $15 a year, paid at the end of the year, and in between time, if they got sick, they were docked for not going to work. If they needed a tool or they broke one, they were docked for that too. So possibly by the end of the year, they may have had $10 paid to them for a year's worth of work. Not exactly very fair, but it was what they had, and so they, at that time, would have still been living in this particular structure, but as freed people, but with a whole lot of coverage and a whole lot of stipulations as to what they could do with their lives. Inside here are pictures also of the quarters when it was back in the 1930s and they had to refurbish the entire building. Throughout the building, there's also photos of some of the formerly enslaved people, and then the same families who stayed on the property, their pictures are here, and some of the success stories too, like some of their children who managed while free to go to school and get a high school diploma, the first high school graduates in a long line of their family. Some going to Augusta, starting a business, and you get to learn about them there too. So there were a lot of successful stories coming from the formerly enslaved people that we would never have known about if James would not have been writing down these names. So that's, again, one redeeming quality. This is a picture of the stable as it used to be. Now this I took off of the South Carolina Archives page. So this was probably a picture taken by somebody else and then donated to the state. But you see that it's an L-shaped stable. There's a fence around it, like a paddock to keep the animals in. But eventually, one side of that burned. They never did rebuild it, so there's only one piece left, and that's what we have today. Now this part that faces the house, let me see, here we go. This part faces the main plantation home. This is a ladder that goes up into the attic of the stable. And this is where the workers would have put big bales of hay to feed the horses. And then they had a really cool feeding situation here. They had this, like a chute coming down from the attic so they could drop hay down into a cradle. So there was no fuss, no muss, no waste of the hay. Of course, you know, this was taken just a few weeks ago because they didn't have it. But the stable remains looking a whole lot like what it used to look. One of the things that's kind of curious, and I've talked to several people who work there, who visited there, and who just are historians, and nobody understands why the stable, the ground is so much lower than the entrance to the stable. When you go into that front little doorway there, you're going down almost 2 feet, it seems, a foot, foot and a half, 2 foot. The only thing anybody seems to understand or to think maybe is that this was a deterrent so that the horses wouldn't try to get out without somebody closing the gate well. And so this way, because they'd have to step up so high, maybe the horses wouldn't want to escape. I don't know. I don't know anybody who does know yet. So if y'all find out, y'all please let me know. The cistern is still there, but again, it's not connected to anything, so the water does not go into there anymore, unless perhaps it leaches through the brick. And before you ever leave that property, you have to walk Magnolia Alley, or as Hammond liked to call it, Alley, okay, because he was so worldly, right? When he built his home, it was completed in 1859, but he wanted more than just a grand home to show. He wanted a driveway of magnificence. So he had all of these magnolia trees planted on either side of the original driveway. You would have gone through some gates, and you would have come down looking at all these beautiful trees, and then you finally pop out of the trees to see the plantation home. So while you're visiting over there, and if you haven't walked it, you have to. I've been doing tours now for 11 years. I never walked the alley. I finally did a couple of weeks ago, and I was just stirred by the beauty. And then when you sit there and use your imagination of what it must have been like for you to come visit this man at the plantation, not so much because of him, because, well, let's face it, y'all, he wasn't a nice man. But you liked his wife, you perhaps liked the children, and then the fact that he was a socialite, he was a cotton grower, well, then you just had to hobnob with him anyways, because money begats money, right? So they would have their people coming over here. He wanted to show them off. This was one of other homes that he had. He first started off in Silver Bluff, but the other plantations he had along the river were the working plantations. This was his show-off home. He didn't have cotton growing here. He had the slaves in the 4 quarters, but the slaves had to remain clean. How you do that and you still do your job, I don't know, but that's what he expected of them. Their houses had to be painted white inside and out. This was his show-off home. And when he knew company was coming, he'd tell everybody, snap to attention and make it look good. Luckily, we don't have to snap to attention now. We just show up. Everybody has a good time. The park rangers educate you and entertain you with their stories. And I hope you all have learned maybe a little bit extra something about Redcliffe today, and make it a point to go back and visit over and over, because you'll always learn something new. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir.
What impact did the Civil War have on the property?
On Redcliffe?
Yeah.
Well, he lost all of his slaves. Hammond died before, about a year before the Civil War was completed. In fact, he told his son, if we lose, just take a plow and run over my grave. He didn't care what was going to happen. He knew his life was going to be over, and he knew that the world as he knew it was going to be over. So they did lose their slaves. Those who were emancipated did, a few, stay on and continued to help sharecrop the property, but they did lose a lot of money. His wife stayed living at the home, eventually sold it to her son, and then he sold it to another family member too. But nobody ever had as much money as he had from marrying Catherine and starting the plantation.
What's the current acreage of Redcliffe?
I'm sorry?
Current acreage?
How much acreage on this particular property? I'm not sure what Redcliffe has. No, it's not coming to me. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'll find out for you though.
Is there a cemetery on the lot, on the land?
There is a cemetery, the Hammonds have their own cemetery. It's not right next to the home. It's, according to the map, a little bit to the right of the pond that's on the home property.
And the slaves are buried where?
The slaves have their own separate cemetery somewhere else. But the Hammonds is right there on the property, but further from the home.
And he's buried there.
He is buried there, his wife is buried there. Supposedly, the infant that died in Germany was then transferred and buried there too, but I've not seen the headstone for that, but that's what they claim.
Good.
Anyone else? Well, thank y'all so much for coming.